you ready to start. Vanesa Polastri is an ELT educator who teaches written discourse practices 2 and children's literature at a teachers training college, as well as English 1 and 2 at Social Work College. She's also working at the University of Buenos Aires as an assistant teacher. She has volunteered as an editor for AGEL and as a board member for APIVA. With 17 years of experience, she has taught English in primary and secondary and tertiary levels, and also worked as an academic secretary in higher education. María Eva Blaiotta is an ELT educator who teaches English 1 and 2 at a language and literature teachers training college, as well as comprehensive sexuality education at a geography teachers training college in the same institution. With over 20 years of experience, she is currently teaching English in primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. She is also coordinating the English department at Secondary School 9. She was vice president of April Junín. She has also worked in the comprehensive sexuality education program for the province of Buenos Aires as a coordinator for Junín and neighboring towns. Thank you very much for sharing this presentation with us. The floor is yours.
Okay. Eva is going to be sharing the presentation. Okay. As you have just heard, we are Vanesa Polastri and Eva Blaiotta. I am from Longchamps and I work in Leo at a social work college. And I'm going to be telling you about 2 experiences, one in first year in English 1 in third year, sorry, and another one in English 2 in fourth year, in the last year of the course of studies. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. In third year, in our first lesson, we begin by reading a poem by Zephaniah. I don't know if you know him. He's very well known for English teachers. Why, who are we? Because we don't know each other on this first lesson. It's the first time I see them. And before reading the poem, I tell my students that the writer is a British poet. So I play with stereotypes and I ask them what they think he looks like. So in general, they tell me that it might be a middle-aged man or even older, maybe bald or white, with a white beard, right? And then I show them the photograph with dreadlocks, black, with Jamaican origins, and we break stereotypes from the very first class. And apart from the content of the poem, which is very rich, we also pay attention to the illustrations around it. Yes, as you can see, labels are very important here. On the left, we've got labels such as tall, rich, big, tiny. So they refer to physical appearance, to socioeconomic status. And on the right, we have other kinds of labels that don't separate us or that don't discriminate, but that unite us. That's why we got we, all, everyone, us. And this is what leads me to begin dealing with pronouns, right? We, us, we talk about subjective pronouns, objective pronouns, and at the bottom there is a chart. I also introduce inclusive pronouns, right? And this is how we start tackling gender perspective and, of course, respecting diversity. We can move on to the next slide. In the poem, Zephaniah ends up by saying that we are all a big family. So this is the next topic that we're going to discuss. The thing is that I bring this text on the right. This is a chapter from a book for social workers with gender perspective. And apparently, it seems that there will be a definition of what the family or what a family is. But on the contrary, we only have here criticism of the traditional conceptualization of families. So when we think of families, the first thing that we may think of is blood ties. But what happens with fictive kin? Fictive kin is el tío o la tía que no es hermano ni de la madre ni del hermano, someone, a friend of the family who's always present and supporting the family. So they are part of the family, but they do not share blood ties. Then, of course, when we think of the family, we might have this idea of the nuclear family, parents and children. What happens in families in which there are no parents, but those who exercise that role are grandparents or aunts or uncles? Yes, they belong to the extended family, but they are the core family. And another thing that we might consider when we think of families is living in the same household. But there are other situations and other families in which for example, the father moves to another country, to maybe a neighboring country or to another one further away to work and send money to the family. They don't share the same household. Or if there is a relative who is in jail, which might be the case of our own students, yes, and they are family all the same, right? So in this text, there is no exact definition of what families are. So I ask my students to write it in Spanish, and then we write something together by sharing their different points of view. We build a definition of family together. We can move on to the next one. Of course, we start seeing that there are different family structures. And from this page, Educational World, Welcoming Diverse Family Structures, we get specific academic vocabulary to deal with that. Remember that my students are about to be social workers, so families and family situations is something that they deal with every day. And here we've got a list such as single parent, foster parents, adoptive parents, seeing this subtle difference between foster and adoptive, no? Those who take care of you, assigned by the state, but who haven't adopted you, it's temporary. Or then blended families, unmarried biological parents. Well, that's another traditional thing, thinking of parents as married. Well, nowadays it's not that much in fashion. LGBT parents, non-parent relative as a guardian. And I've written these situations on the right. Which family structure is it? Yes, I wrote different kinds of families. I described them, and the students have to pick up a term from the list in these categories. We also watch a video and we analyze the lyrics of this song, Family Portrait. I don't know if you know it, sung by Pink. In this lyrics, she explores her own childhood within a dysfunctional family, parents that are about to divorce, and we see it from the eyes of a social worker. We see the problem, there is no communication, and the only way in which they communicate is by shouting at each other, and the girl thinks she is to blame. Maybe they are arguing because of her. She doesn't want to have two houses with two addresses, and she wants her family to be like the family portrayed on television. So there we've got this mass media influence of the portrait of happy families, right? And I also bring the family book to them to see how this very same topic can be tackled and discussed with little children. Eva, we can move on. Okay, from another book about social work, but published in the USA, I extracted a real conversation between a victim of gender violence and a social worker who answers the phone at a woman's shelter, right? And we see the, let's say, protocol they apply and what how they communicate with the victim. And we also criticize here a line in which the social worker says, why haven't you called the police before? Because this was not the first time that this woman was beaten. And this is completely opposite to the way social workers work here in Argentina. Yes, here we work with a more sensitive approach. Yes, in the other case, it was judging, passing judgment. And with respect to language, we focus on imperatives because a social worker tells the woman, pay for the cab, come here immediately, bring toothbrushes, bring toys for your children. So then we use that for something else. And on the right, you have an article about Eva Giberti. She's from Buenos Aires, and in the year 2006, she started a program which she named Victims Against Violence. And she uses this preposition against on purpose. Instead of saying victims of violence, that would place them as in a passive role, yes, as sufferers. She uses against for victims to start acting against violence, yes, to get empowered and to carry out actions to be free and to give their lives new meaning. Let's move on. Yes. Here you will see that other axes of comprehensive sexuality education are tackled, such as taking care of the body and mind and valuing affectivity. How do we tackle them? I mean, it's not that we haven't tackled them before, but here we pay special attention to it. These two posts, they are media posts, were taken from a Facebook account called Latino Parenting. So here we start paying attention to that. Latino, so in fact, it's again, the story of told by a woman, but of her youth or of her childhood as a Mexican immigrant to the USA. And she lived with her mother, and they were provided with some housing. They were in a housing program by the state, but they had to comply with several requirements. Yes, for example, she had to get good marks at school, and she had to mediate between the social worker and her mom because her mother did not speak English. So she had all the burden on her back. She had to do well at school. She was pressed by her mother. She was pressed by the social worker. Some of them did it implicitly, like the social worker, but her mother told her things that hurt her feelings, right? And she had to speak in those meetings, and that's why we pay attention here to mental burden. And on the right, you will see a partial exam, yes, to see how I organize the structure. There is an anticipation or prelectura, las consignas están en castellano, verificación de la lectura, so the reading comprehension there, paying attention to content and form simultaneously, and then integración or postlectura. I ask my students to relate the text that I bring here to previous texts we used in the term. And if you pay attention to the title of the text here it is trauma-informed social work practice. Yes, do you know this concept of trauma-informed? So exercising their profession by being respectful, sensitive to what might have happened to the other person. El sujeto de derechos, that's how they call them, right? It's interesting that in several papers that we've read, in the USA, they say client. You see this difference that has to do with capitalist mind, right? Cliente already shows this economic relationship between them. and a totally different framework. We can move on. Here, this is like an activity that integrates all these axes. We've got problematic situations inside different families. So for example, my daughter is a 12-year-old student. She suffers from bullying at school. It's a mother who is writing. And what students have to do is to provide pieces of advice, which are on the right, one in a positive form by starting with the verb in the infinitive in an imperative form, and then another one in the negative form. For example, letter J, don't underestimate the problem, as violent relationships establish patterns of interaction, right? So something that might happen at school or when you are very little, if you take this role of the victim, then and you receive passively the violence of other people, then this pattern of interaction might replicate in future relationships. Yeah, so we have to stop and think and develop tools to break those kind of ties, harmful ties. And in fourth, let's move on. Several years ago, like the previous dissertante was saying, in this case, 2019, pre-pandemic, we built with the students in fourth biography of María Esther Tomasi. First of all, I have to clarify that María Esther Tomasi is the name that our institution has. It was voted in 2009. And within that research, my students interviewed María Esther's brother. María Esther was disappeared. She was a teacher and she wanted to be a social worker. So that's why, como en el instituto tenemos carreras docentes y también la de trabajo social, it was like the most representative person. If you search her on the internet, there is very little information, only the age she was when she was abducted and where she was abducted from, here at Drogué, very close. Well, we built it in English, and now, many years after, I use this biography as a product, and we read it with other students. We read it and we complete, for example, a fact file. Then there is a project called Los Aparecidos. You see that the name is in Spanish, and it's the opposite of the disappeared, because an American artist, Brian Carlson, who is living here in Buenos Aires, started it several years ago. He started painting portraits of the disappeared. And he painted the portrait of María Esther. So we invited him last year, and he brought the portrait to the institution, right? And he has a website in which he tells the rationale behind this memorial project. The text is much longer than this one, and it is written in academic vocabulary, but I asked my students to read the authentic piece in chunks. I mean, one group reads the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, another group reads some other paragraphs, and then they have to spot the information there that answers these questions in the middle. Yes, encuentra las respuestas a las siguientes preguntas en el texto introductorio y explicativo de Brian Carlson de su página y exhibición Los Desaparecidos. So they have the questions in Spanish, they have to write the answers in Spanish, but the original text is in English. So after we discuss all these questions, we get to know the meaning of the whole text. We can move on, Eva. And in fourth, I deal with several biographies of many activists. For example, Rigoberta Menchú, she's alive. So we've got María Esther, someone who died some years ago. Rigoberta, who is alive. Then in the following one, we can move on, Eva. In the following, we will see that the Mirabal sisters. So here we've got a biography that is not in the third person singular. It's in the third person plural, which is quite strange to find. And they were from the Dominican Republic. I don't know if you know them. This biography was taken from Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. And in that book, which is addressed to children, let's say the harsh parts are removed because it is written for little girls. But at the end of the biography, you see that 3 of these sisters, they are 4, died on the same day. And that already makes you think they were killed, yes, in the Trujillo dictatorship. And why do I bring this biography? Because near the social work college, there is an organization, a community organization called Mariposas de Villa París. The Mirabal sisters were called Las Mariposas. And on the day of their murder, the day of violence against women was established. Yes, on the 25th of November. So we all celebrate it around the world. I mean, it's a commemoration day, but to act against violence against women. And of course, in biographies, we pay attention to the simple past, inactive voice, impassive voice. Of course, this is from the linguistic point of view. And the man in the photograph is Brian Carlson, and there he's holding a banner of Nora Cortiñas, right? And we can move on. He also talks about Nora in his Facebook account. So I also use Facebook posts, which are shorter, but they are all very deep. He also wrote another post about women abducted in the Argentinian dictatorship, in our last dictatorship. So I bring that and we analyze it from content and form. And well, the mother of social work, an American woman called Mary Ellen Richmond. So this is a partial exam, right? And I got to know about her by talking with another teacher, a teacher who teaches a subject in the discipline, but in Spanish. And he told me, oh, you should look up something about her. And so I take down notes and I investigate. Let's move on. And well, here we've got different articles and about violence against women, and we pay attention to these 5 questions in any article: what, who, when, where, why. So we try to answer that to grasp the general meaning. Eva, we can move on. And human rights are a pillar in social work. So we read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We read the original text, which is quite long, but I do the same thing that I did with the explanation of the rationale behind the memorial project. I assign specific articles to different groups. You read from article 1 to 10, you read other 5, like that. And then we make a kind of summary with this list. It's not the full list of articles, but the main articles. So they have to read the synthesis of the idea and spot what article it is. And we also read the introduction of this other kind of manual of human rights and social work. One more slide. And then we finish with the rights of children, the rights to protection, the right to participation, and we make a contrast between this chapter, The Monster Story, from Frankenstein's adaptation. It's an abridged reader, and here we see the voice of the creature, right? I even criticize the title, but this is the title in the reader. And we compare Victor to a father who has abandoned his child. So he hasn't given him any protection, any food, education. So he has violated all the rights of children, right? Well, this is my last experience, and now it's Eva's turn.
Okay, good morning. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if I've got the audio activated. Yes? Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. Well, sorry. Well, my name is María Eva, and I teach English in Spanish language and literature teachers training college. There are 2 levels of English, in 3rd and in 4th year. In third year, the first topic we deal with is personal introductions. From my own introduction, I make focus on personal pronouns, especially when it comes to the third person singular pronoun. We reflect upon the fact that the associations when speaking of a third person singular are not always accurate and helpful. So thus I introduce the ediciión pronouns, that is the non-binary pronouns, which are, well, they, them, their, theirs, themselves, in order that they are more acceptable to use when you do not yet know if a person goes by one or another set or sets personal pronouns. Well, I chose what's in a name. I chose this vignette, my name, from a novel, The House on Mango Street, by Sandra Cisneros, who is a Chicano writer. It shows, I intend here to show students how people's identities are represented in books. We work with vocabulary, we analyze the vignette in terms of language and content. And we also work with this poem by Rupi Kaur, which talks about our own voice. At the end of the sequence, as I wrote there, my students are required to write their own introduction. It's like a short text about their own names, and I encourage them to make multimodal texts using audio, videos, their own voices, pictures. Since at this stage of language learning, I consider images very important because they can make sense, or they help them make sense and convey their messages, their ideas. Okay, on the right, you can see a fragment of a collage my students made this year, because I have already worked with this. Well, closely connected to identity and diversity, that is closely connected to identity is diversity. And I have found in this vignette also from the same book, the context to introduce diversity. It's Hairs from The House on Mango Street, in which the writer uses imagery to reveal that everyone might seem the same in a family, but on the inside, everyone has a unique personality. Esperanza's family, Esperanza is the main character in the novel. Esperanza's family has the same hair color, but individually, each member or each hair holds a different personality or a different story. Well, how to tackle, or how I tackle the text. Well, I introduce words, the vocabulary. Then we work with the overall meaning of the text. And then we work with a figurative language, as I wrote there on the right, in order to guide my students into reading between the lines in a foreign language. Okay, in this other sequence, this vignette is also from the same novel. I chose it because the writer goes on talking about her family. In this case, she talks about her brothers and her sister, her little sister, and the relationships between boys and girls in a Latino community in which she lives, and where stereotypes, especially gender stereotypes, are deeply rooted. She, in this vignette, she describes societal expectations placed on women within this community. And I must say that in the novel, Sandra Cisneros draws heavily on her own experiences as a Mexican-American growing up in Chicago. Her parents were Mexican. Esperanza, the narrator, notes that the boys and the girls do not socialize with each other in the neighborhood. Even though she can talk to her brothers at home, they are not required, or they are not, they do not, or they refuse to talk to her outside. Esperanza then has to socialize with her younger sister, Neni, who she notes is too young to be her choice for a friend if she were not her sister. And what is worse, Esperanza, or Neni, is Esperanza's responsibility. She has to take care of her. And that is why the main character longs for a best friend. And she says that without which she feels anchored or trapped in this community. As I wrote there on the right, this vignette deals with themes of gender and sexuality, dreams, identity, and autonomy. And I consider that the fact that she acknowledges her feelings is related to valuing affectivity, which is one of the axes of comprehensive sexuality education. In this poem, Be a Lady, they said, the poem also deals with the topic of expectations. After we work with the language, there's a lot of vocabulary, I suggest students to focus on these expectations and classify them, whether they have to do with marriage, with societal expectations and beauty standards. And they complete this graphic organizer on the right. As I said, there are lots of lexical items to work with. I introduce imperatives to give advice, and they complete this table with collocations from the text. As a final task, at the bottom, as a final task, they identify and analyze how media and cultural representations perpetuate symbolic violence, gender stereotypes, the neglect for diversity, romanticized notions of happiness and success. And they have to hack or talent songs from popular culture which reinforce stereotypes. Well, here I intend to design a genre-oriented lesson. Autonomy is again the theme in this vignette, Minerva writes poems. The writer is trying to say that you have to make your own choices in life. And she talks about how Minerva has become trapped in this, in her own life, by a man who constantly keeps leaving her and coming back only to break her heart every time he comes back. He does so, right? So she forgives him again and again, and we conclude that this is a case of psychological abuse. By reading this, we learn that Minerva, at night, while her children are asleep, she takes small pieces of paper and writes poems on them, and then she folds them up until they are very tiny, and she only shares these poems with Esperanza, the main character throughout the novel. And the other way around, Esperanza shares her own poems with Minerva. And we learn that at last Esperanza has found that friend that she had been longing for. The relationship, that is, we reflect on the relationship between these two women, and we conclude that this is a type of sorority. This is like a political pact among these two women who help and support each other. Sorority is a term which was coined or defined during the second wave of feminism. Well, again, the themes are the ones on the right are gender and sexuality, the power of language, because they use writing as a way of expressing their feelings, the struggle, you can read the themes there. And Well, here, sorry, I forgot something. Then I used this song, Luca. Luca is a song which was popular at the end of the 80s. It was released at the end of the 80s. The song deals with the topic of child abuse. Child abuse, but physical and sexual abuse. Well, in this sequence, the axis of, again, valuing affectivity is present since, well, both women decide to do something about their feelings. They decide to share their own feelings. They decide to write about them as a way of deconstructing and undergoing the pressures of this patriarchal society they live in. And well, the same happens with the song. And I use these two texts, two stories, to complete this Venn diagram, which helps us or offers opportunities for text analysis, opportunities to develop vocabulary, as well as develop high-order thinking skills, like critical thinking, for example. On the right, there are some examples of productions my students made last year. This is an example of partial test in which I assess language and content. Well, in fourth year, the purpose of this second level of the language is to offer instances to consolidate communicative competence by reading comprehension, oral, reading and listening comprehension, and some oral and written production through diverse texts and resources which intend to make significant use of the language. So we start with linguistic landscape. We work with the concept of linguistic landscape, that is the language that surrounds us in forms of words, in forms of images, like graffitis, for example, that are either in public or in private spaces. Again, images play an important role, in this case, to introduce certain topics. Students are asked to bring their own examples of linguistic landscape around or in their contexts, and they are asked to bring them to class, and I provide my own examples, which are the ones on the left, and I use them to introduce the concept of human rights. So I ask students to produce their own definitions, and then we watch this video where people in the street are asked to provide an answer to what are human rights. So we then, when we compare both definitions, both my students and these people, and then we got these questions apart that they are in English, but not all the time my students are required to produce answers in English. They sometimes answer them in Spanish because the intention is to promote critical thinking again. Well, we read the definition of human rights, and then we watch a video, which is the one on the right at the top. This video was commissioned by Amnesty International to mark their 20th anniversary back in the year 2011, many years ago. Students identify which human rights are portrayed in this video, and they reflect, or we reflect together on the message the video gives us, which is something like, we have been standing for freedom for the last 50 years, and we still have a long way to go. This video also invites us to be a voice for human rights and thus to become active agents of change. So we read this infographic, which is like a summary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I do not always read the complete Declaration of Human Rights, since sometimes it's too far-fetched for my students. So we read or we work with these noun phrases like the right to, the freedom of, freedom from, and then on the right there are some post-viewing questions and some discussion questions that again help them develop critical thinking. Well, here, refugees and migrant rights are human rights. Here we work with these tweets on the left. Students have to decide if they describe situations where people are welcome or unwelcome. The tweets are about refugees who, as individuals, possess inherent human rights. We reflect on this, and we learn that the international law protects their rights and ensures they are not returned to situations where their lives or their freedom are at risk. However, we know that this is not always so. As regards language, in order to express purpose and add information, we work with linkers. And as the final task, students are asked to work in subgroups, organizing a campaign, identifying a vulnerable group in society, and to organizing a campaign in order to help them, and as a way of getting involved and becoming advocates for human rights. With this short story, I tried to attend to the representation of Black people in teaching materials, to comply with centering Black voices in the classroom. So we work with this short story, The Landless, which is about a family who is forced to leave their own land since, well, in the name of progress, some people have invaded and destroyed their home and the natural environment surrounding it. These people belong to La Comunidad Marrona in Bolivia. So we learn how comprehensive sexuality education content advocate for diversity and equality and human rights. So we read this story from a critical perspective, and stereotypes is again a theme in this story, since we reflect on how they stereotypes and biased representations can reinforce these racist beliefs and attitudes. Okay, and then, well, women and the right to adequate housing. We continue with human rights. The right to adequate housing is a central component of women's rights. The right to equality, it is stated in Article 25 of the International Declaration of Human Rights, which I copied there. Sorry, it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Inspired in Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, this vignette, A House of My Own, again from the same novel I mentioned before, we go through the themes of autonomous sexuality, and the right to a house. Then this is, well, next. Okay, well, here I'm showing you an example again of a partial test in which I am assessing language and content. And this is a text that I produced from an article from the New York Times, and it's about the mole people. These are people living in New York tunnels, and living in underground infrastructure in New York, creating their own community. This text is intended to raise feelings of empathy and motivate students to become involved in their cause, and claiming the cause these people have. Their cause is claiming for the right of a house, and well, this inspiring them to become agents of change, probably. Okay, so here is and this is how Vanessa and me have found a way where comprehensive sexuality education contents allow our students to integrate English and comprehensive sexuality education with a focus on authentic materials, tasks, purposes, from a clear perspective as well as from a critical perspective. Well, that's all. Thank you. Cannot.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This was amazing. Very, very nice to listen to you and all your experiences. Okay. Wow. Saturday morning is in the middle of it. So we continue with some mate, a short break. Are there any questions for Vanessa and for Maria Eva? Any questions that you want? We have been watching, and Vanessa has also been reading the chat. I was listening and I was looking at all the sharing that is going on there. Very nice, very productive sharing. Thanks. Okay. Shall we go on a break? Agustina, what do you say? Time for a break.
Yeah, I think there is a question. I don't know, Vanessa, if you can read it and address it.
Okay, there's a question which reads, Vanessa, Maria Eva, when you give different groups extracts, how do they share them with the other groups or students? In my case, I always have one student in the group, agendado, in my phone, so I share them the text virtually. In general, they ask me to share the text one day before so that they can bring it, print it, yes, but well, I always have one contact on the phone. And when we correct, we read together. In general, I read the text and we pause and we analyze both the language and the content. For example, in the case of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is quite dense, we criticize the way in which it was worded, because of course it was written several years ago, and to talk about humanity, you've got the term mankind, or to talk about any person, you have he and his rights. Yeah, so having men as a representation of all humanity. So we think of alternatives, right? Eva, how do you share the text?
Okay, I have a Drive folder where I upload all the material. Besides, the Institute has got a platform from the info, and well, and it's very useful because well, everything can go in there and collaboratively, the same as you can do with Google Forms or with Google Documents or slides. Well, you can work with wikis, and it's a very good way of that is following their performance. You can know their contributions, you can intervene them, so it's very useful. So we've got both methods, Drive and the platform.
Acá veo otra pregunta, si es en castellano o en inglés. En mi caso, la clase la doy en castellano. Lo que tengo en inglés es el raw material de los textos, ¿sí? O sea, las discusiones son en castellano, lo que ellos comentan es en castellano, y si en mi caso no producimos en inglés, salvo en grupo. Digamos, el objetivo es lectura comprensiva desde mi espacio. En el de Eva entiendo que es distinto y que van un pasito más allá y producen con las herramientas que tienen, ¿verdad?
Sí, la clase también es en español, por supuesto. Bueno, sí, intento que vayan un pasito más allá, pero por supuesto, scaffolding all the time. Eh, pero, digamos, eh, proveyéndoles de exponentes lingüísticos y, bueno, estructuras y todo el tiempo, modelos y ejemplos a seguir. La idea es que se produzca. Oralmente muy poco, pero principalmente escrito. Yo en realidad sí trato de trabajar con todas las habilidades, pero bueno, algunas tienen ya más preponderancia sobre la otra, porque además son 2 módulos semanales y son muy cortitos y la verdad es que tenemos tantas cosas. Esto es un recorte de lo que trabajamos y hay veces hay tantas cosas para trabajar que, bueno, no se puede abordar todo, pero bueno, esa es la manera en que trabajamos y en español.
Ese
Hay más
poquito,
preguntas.
María Eva, ese poquito que vos decís, 2 módulos, ¿son de 40
Sí.
minutos, de 60, de
No,
80, de cuánto?
son de 60 minutos, pero a veces no son todos de 60 minutos. Por ejemplo, a mí en cuarto me pasa que tengo en la última hora, que es de 10 de la noche a 10:45, porque...
Profe, dejanos salir antes hoy.
Se van,
No,
imagínate que
y
son
el
adultos,
otro,
no hace falta
exacto,
permiso.
no, no, es terrible. Y el otro módulo es en la prehora y no todo el mundo llega a tiempo en la prehora. Así que, bueno, malabares hay que hacer. Sí, terrible. Hay muchas más preguntas, la verdad es que me las perdí porque no las vi.
Creo que estamos más o menos, ¿eh? Creo que hemos contestado.
Ah, bueno.
Sí, 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 sí. Se iba contestando en la medida que ibas hablando, se iban contestando
Ah,
algunas de las cuestiones, así que
ah,
estuvo
buenísimo.
bien, bien. ¿Cerramos, les parece? Agustina, ¿qué decís? ¿Sí? ¿Nos vemos en 5, en 10? Dale,
Perfecto,
teacher,
en
dale,
5
teacher
estamos de
Agustina,
vuelta.
dame sí, dame 10. En 5 estamos acá. Listo.
Muchas gracias.